You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. Dr. Wegner, can you give us the Hebrew word of the day?
Well, I'm going to start with just a picture first. Can I do
Okay.
that?
Yeah, sure.
We're going to cover Ruth today, right?
Yeah.
So I've got this picture of gleaning on there. Can you see that? That one
Yeah.
actually is a real famous picture of it. But gleaning, you can see them picking up the leftovers from what the harvesters haven't picked up. So
Yeah.
that's going to be crucial to our understanding today. So I wanted you to make sure you saw that picture.
Sure, yeah.
All right. Okay, now we can do the Hebrew word for today.
Yeah, let's
In
get
fact, today we've got kind of several of them, but they're all in one verse or in
Okay.
two verses. Okay. The first one is in Hebrew, you can tell the difference between a temporary prohibition and a permanent prohibition by
Okay.
the words that are or the forms that are used.
Yeah.
So in the first in Ruth 1:16 it says, "And Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you.'" That part right there is um, a temporary prohibition. She's not saying don't ever urge me to leave you, but it means don't do it now. Is more
Okay.
how that temporary prohibition works.
Yeah.
So it's kind of neat. It's real clear in the text that she's saying that. And in sometimes like in Judges, we just got through with that, and
Right.
and in Joshua sometimes it would say do not be afraid. It's not a permanent prohibition, it's a temporary one. Don't be afraid
Oh,
right
interesting.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I'd let you guys know that there's a difference between how the Hebrew shows a permanent prohibition versus a temporary one. And at this point, this is a temporary prohibition. Don't urge me to leave you now.
Can
Okay.
you explain a little bit how that works, like functionally?
I can do it a little. I don't know if you
Okay.
can see the Hebrew up there, but that first word in yellow there,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually it's the word for not,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not low. Low is the common one for not.
Right.
And this one is the al is the temporary one. So
I
if I
see.
had low on instead of al there, then
Mm-hmm.
it would probably be don't
A little more
ever
permanent.
urge me
Yeah.
to leave you. Yeah. So it's because of that first
That prefix kind
word
of.
there with the verb, the way that it's used with the verb.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now the next one is an oath formula. And
Mm.
this is going to be really important. Let me just read this because this is like the classic verse for Ruth. And Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Then the next part, "Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me."
Mm.
That second part there is an oath formula.
Yeah.
Right before this, Ruth is or Naomi is urging Ruth to go back to her mother actually,
Yeah.
and so it's saying go back to your family. The minute she gives this oath, Naomi doesn't do it anymore because at that point, if she then says, "Oh, go on back," it's at that point God is actually going to be held responsible now for punishing her if
Mm.
she does leave Ruth.
Hmm.
So it's kind of interesting. I thought, man, it makes it real clear why Naomi stops urging her to go, and it pretty much settles the issue. So
Yeah.
it's that,
Right.
may the Lord do to me, and more so, and even more so, kind of is what it is. If anything, but it's the Hebrew is kind of interesting because it says, if the death parts between you and me. So
Mm.
it's the death. They usually understand that to mean if anything but the death parts us. So it's
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
interesting. It's kind of got
Yeah.
some Hebrew grammar here with you, even
Right. Yeah.
not only the word for the day.
Yeah.
So does that all make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would agree. This is kind of the
Yeah.
core verse that kind of kicks us off, you know?
All right. Should we go to the next part?
Yeah. Let's look.
Okay, I'm going to explain kind of what the book's about. In Ruth 1:1, there are some things there that actually help us understand the book a lot. So in Ruth 1, it says, "Now it came about in the days when the judges governed." So that actually tells you, we just got done with talking about the judges and how bad a time it was. Now we've
Right.
got a picture of a God. she's a woman that fears God in this time period. And not only fears God, she's an amazing woman anyway, right? I mean, she you remember in chapter 1, she leaves her, in fact, that verse just told us she's going to leave
Hmm.
her own family and her own country and all that and go with Naomi. Man, Naomi has no one else to look after her
Mm,
except Ruth. And I think it's kind
sure.
of interesting. So here's a woman. Her Naomi's husband just died. Then her sons die,
Yeah.
and I'm sure Ruth's wondering what kind of a God would does Naomi have where it leaves this poor woman defenseless, and this
Mm,
God doesn't even take care of her. So I think it's kind of amazing when she says, "Your God will be my God," because I'm
yeah.
going, what does she know about this God? At least from the biblical text, it's not good. But I'm sure
Right.
she also saw in Naomi,
Mm,
a godly character and stuff like that. So it
sure.
must have been that convinced her that this God is worth worshiping.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I just think that's kind of interesting. Then another thing, it says there's a famine in the land. Now
Uh-huh.
remember, I don't think I've ever been through a famine. I'm pretty sure of that.
Right. Right.
But there are parts of the country that really do,
Yeah.
of the world anyway, that have famine, and those famines are desperate.
Yeah.
And so this is a time period where it's so desperate that they're willing to leave their own country and go to somewhere else. In
Yeah.
this case, Moab. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. Another thing you learn, it says, and a certain man of Bethlehem of Judea or of Judah. Man,
Mm,
that ought to send lights up in your or flags up and say, "Oh, that's the city of David," right? So
right.
automatically that's telling you what's going on.
Yeah.
Then the next thing that I think is really amazing there is that next phrase. It actually says, they go to the land of Moab. I'm going, why would you ever go to Moab? Moab has the same problem as Israel has.
Mm,
If there's a drought in Israel or a famine in Israel, why wouldn't there also be a famine in Moab? Because it's got the same kind of terrain, kind of um,
right.
uh, country. I've got
Weather.
some pictures here to show you what it looks like.
Yeah.
Look at that's a picture of the plains of Moab.
Yeah. It's very
I'm
dry.
going, oh man, that looks wonderful. If there's a famine in my land, that's where I want to go, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
But what's interesting is you would think that they would go to Egypt. That's where they always go, right? So whenever there's a famine in Israel, they
Hmm.
they always head to Egypt because that makes perfect sense. The
Right.
Nile, it always is flowing, and if there's a drought up in the northern part of Egypt, the rain that's coming from the Nile is coming from much lower, clear down in
Mm,
about the middle of the country. So
right.
it's never had that problem. But the problem is in Egypt, they're in the New Kingdom period, and they
Mm,
had just expelled the Hyksos from there,
mm,
which were Semites. So to have them then go back to Egypt, I'm sure that the Egyptians just hated
yeah. It
any
was too
Semites
risky.
that would be heading in.
Yeah.
So it's obviously there's a problem in Egypt that these people don't want to have a problem there, so they're heading to Moab. It
Yeah.
just seems funny because Moab doesn't seem like it's any better
It would
than the
be.
problem they'd have in Israel.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense? I thought,
Yeah. Yeah.
in that first verse, you learn all kinds of things about this.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back and we'll see that picture again. That just amazes me, that they would go to Moab when it looks that dry.
Well, and
Um,
it probably means that it was a very desperate
yeah.
situation where they were to
Uh
think
huh.
that that would be better, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought it's funny. And it helps us to understand what's going on. Do you remember we talked last time about the judges? And here's that chart that I had, but it would be somewhere in that time frame on at least I think it's on the upper part there,
Hmm.
sometime in then there, from I don't know, late 1300s to the 1100s, somewhere in there, that this is going to take place. And I don't
Yeah.
think it gives us much more specific information as to when it takes place. It just said sometime during that.
Yeah.
So I thought that might help us some to know that. Now here's my um, PowerPoint of the book, and I've got I've got the date is somewhere in the early monarchy, probably. So it's shortly after it probably occurred. We don't know who wrote it. But clearly the purpose is to demonstrate a godly person, a non-Israelite, of course,
Yeah.
during the time of the judges. And I'm going, man, that's kind of neat. So if God can't find godly people in his own country, he can go
Mm.
to another country and find them.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
I think the whole key to this book is hesed, the idea of loving kindness.
Yeah.
That's probably not a great translation of it, but it's the best we got in English.
Mm.
But the first chapter, it's Naomi loses all her family and all that, and so she's wondering, where's the hesed? Where's this
Right.
God that is supposed to love us? Then in the rest of chapter 1 and in chapter 2, you've got, or at least in chapter 1, you've got Ruth coming alongside of Naomi, and that's clearly showing Ruth has hesed, and certainly for Ruth is, or for Naomi especially.
Yeah.
Then in chapter 2, you've got Boaz's hesed, and then Boaz marries Ruth, so you've got God's hesed, and
Mm.
there's several aspects of it there. Remember, Boaz thinks it's kind of neat that this Ruth is willing to, Boaz apparently is older and she's a younger lady, and he thinks it's God's hesed that he would even get married to this
Mm.
woman.
Mm.
And then Boaz shows it to Ruth by marrying her. Here's a foreigner that he marries into, that now gets married in the land of the Israelite land.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of different hesed being showed between people, between God. So I think that's kind of the key idea of the book.
Yeah.
So, and then I've got some on this. I wanted to make sure you knew where Moab was. So I've got a picture of a
Yeah.
map of where Moab is. And then the ideas of gleaning, removing the sandal, and leaders at the city gate. Those are all cultural things that actually make this book even more interesting.
Mm.
The idea of gleaning. As far as I know, Israel is the only country that does gleaning.
Mm.
So Naomi, if she stays in Moab, there's no one that's going to take care of her, at least that I can see. And she's
Right.
got no one to help. So she heads back home, and God's already got a plan on how to take care of them. That the
Right.
idea of gleaning had already been initiated into the country. Now, how much, even at one point, you remember Boaz tells her, don't go to any other field, stay here. And I think the reason is who knows what could happen in those other fields.
Mm.
Even was gleaning even being done in those other
Mm.
fields, because remember, this is the time of the judges, and
Right.
so even though God had told them to do it, I wonder how many were actually doing it.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
there's that. And then kind of neat is he goes to the leaders at the gate, and apparently that's where the main people would be sitting, so that they could make decisions for the city.
Mm-hmm.
We actually found up in Dan a place, the city of Dan up north. There's actually a place in the city that's got what looks like a bench where the elders of the city would sit inside the gate so that they would make those kind of decisions. So
Right.
it's kind of neat. That was kind of one of the main things that you need to know if you're going to understand the book of Ruth.
For sure. Yeah.
So those you can see the book has what I consider about 4 parts to it,
Yeah.
each section, and then each one shows quite a bit of hesed, it seems like to me.
Yeah.
So I thought that's kind of helpful.
Yeah. It's really helpful.
All right, here's some key ideas. We've got hesed, loyalty and faithfulness,
Yep.
our best kind of understanding of that. Love displayed during the time of the judges, which seems really odd because probably there wasn't a whole lot of love being displayed among other people in judges.
Sure. Yeah.
The idea of a kinsman redeemer. Remember that one point where he says there's a nearer person,
Mm.
that Goel. It's the term that means a redeemer,
Yeah.
and so Boaz can't really do it because there's one that's closer to him than that,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of interesting. But even that idea of kinsman redeemer is kind of important to the book. And then the last thing is David's ancestors.
For sure.
Okay, so if nothing else, that last chapter or last couple of verses of the book are crucial to
Yeah.
see that now Ruth is going to be incorporated into the godly line,
Yeah.
or
Right.
David's line.
Yeah.
Okay, All right, here's where we're going to start. First verse, first 5 verses. You got a famine in the land that causes Eli Melech's family to go to Moab. Why they're there, and I put up here. It's interesting they go to Moab instead of Egypt, but we've now pretty much talked about that.
Hmm.
And that famines are very dangerous, and we often don't think of that because we get food from all over,
Yeah,
but in a country where that's not possible, it is a very dangerous thing.
for sure. Yeah.
So, okay, Eli Melech means my God, or is probably it might be my God is king, or at
Hmm.
least God is
God is
king.
king. Yeah.
Yeah, so the name kind of means that.
Hmm.
Naomi probably means pleasant, and there's kind of an important verse. Ruth 1:20 says, she says to them, "Do not call me Naomi, pleasant. Call me
Hmm.
Mara, which means bitter. For the Lord, the
Mm.
Almighty, has dealt very bitterly with me." So it's kind of neat. Her own name is actually used as almost a contrast to what's going on
Yeah.
in her life, she thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Mahlan means sickly,
Hmm.
and Kilion probably means frailty or mortality. So it's kind of funny. In the ancient Near East, I don't know if their names were sometimes changed when a major event happened in their lives,
Mm.
because I can't imagine a mom or dad calling them sickly or
Yeah.
frailty or mortality kind of thing,
Right.
mortality or mortal.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that once they died, I can see maybe them taking on that name because it would be
Right.
something that would characterize them.
Yeah. It describes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of funny that those names are so important to the
Yeah.
understanding what's
For
happening.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Naomi's first widowed, and then her husband dies, so she's left with 2 sons.
Yep.
That's still okay because her
Yeah.
sons can take care of her.
And they're
Okay,
supposed to.
yeah, but then her children die, so both of her sons die, and so here you've got Naomi all by herself, basically, with no one to take care of her.
Right.
Verse 8 says this. She tells her 2 daughters-in-laws, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. In
Mm.
my mind, I can't believe that, or hardly believe that Naomi is doing this. That means not only that she's lost now virtually everybody in her life, but now she's sending away her daughters-in-law. Her daughters-in-law, probably, if they loved her, would take care of her. Um, but she's willing to send them off. And I'm going, wow, this lady is quite amazing. She cares more about them than she
Yeah.
does herself.
Yeah.
So that's kind of amazing, isn't it?
Right.
So you see that Naomi's quite a lady too.
Yeah. Very selfless.
Yeah. Okay, here's the next part. So Naomi and Ruth return to Israel. Ruth remains with Naomi. Logically speaking, Oprah was the wisest, for Naomi would not be able to provide for these women. In fact, she even says, even if I had a child tonight, you know, are they going to grow
Yeah.
up? Are you going to wait until they grow up? I mean, she knows that it's not possible. So
Hmm.
she's trying to help them out by sending them off. That's when Ruth then comes in. We've talked about that
She makes the
important verse.
oath.
Yeah. So that's probably why Naomi stops pushing her away.
Right.
So but imagine that's Ruth's quite wise too. She knows that if I make an oath, then Naomi's, it's over. She's
Yeah.
not
We're
going to
locked
push
in.
me away anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Ruth must have known that too.
Hmm.
All right, then we go to the next section. They arrive in Bethlehem,
Hmm.
and she actually believes she's cursed by God. And I mean, it would be pretty obvious. Think about it. She's lost all her family. She actually says, "Oh, here's what she says in verse 19." So they both went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me?"
Hmm.
So here's the poor woman. She's pretty convinced that God is against her. Now,
Yeah.
we know the whole story, so we know that at the end, God just does some amazing things. But I imagine this lady was pretty discouraged, and you can see from what she says.
Right.
There's also something that's kind of interesting. I've got a map here to show you where Bethlehem is.
Hmm.
Um, and then up below that, I've got a picture of the wall that actually surrounds Bethlehem today to
Yeah.
keep the Palestinians away from the Jewish people. They put that wall in because it was so dangerous. They were being attacked all the time, so they put this wall up to keep the Palestinians away.
Hmm.
So I wanted you to see that it's been a hotbed of contentions for some time
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Right.
Now she comes back, and it says very clearly they come back at the time of barley harvest.
Hmm.
Now, I've got a little map here, or I mean, a picture here. Barley harvest is basically the first part of the year, and then they've got all the rest of the harvest, like wheat harvest and stuff like that
Mm.
afterwards. So she came back almost at a perfect time because she's coming back, and now there's going to be all kinds of different harvest time periods that she can also do some gleaning.
Yeah.
So it was actually kind of a brilliant move to come back at this time because at least hopefully there'll be food enough for all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted you to see that. So I've got a little picture there of
Kind
Nissan
of a
when the
calendar.
barley
Yeah.
harvest is. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Then we go to chapter 2. Boaz actually notices Ruth in the fields. I think that was kind of interesting.
Hmm.
Boaz was a wealthy relative. Even Naomi says that. And she told Ruth to glean in his fields because Boaz would, because he's wealthy enough that he can handle this.
Hmm.
But then also Boaz seems to take notice of her right away. So I think that's kind of neat. In chapter 2:1, it says, Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come upon the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who is of the family of Elimelech. So that makes it sound like it was an accident, when it says, and she happened to come upon.
Yeah.
But
Right.
this is all God's plan, but it was kind of interesting the way the biblical text points it out.
Yeah.
All right, then Boaz shows her kindness. He actually says, "I've heard about you and how you've what you've done for your mother-in-law and how
Hmm.
you were kind to all the people." And it says, so he tells the other servants to be kind to her and even pull out, grain from their bag, their
Hmm.
their harvesting, and make sure that she's got enough to eat. So
Yeah.
it's you can tell right away God's using him to help her.
Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
protection, but there's also additional food available.
Yeah, yeah. All right. And also she eats with his servants. So that
Yeah.
probably is another thing that helped her. I mean, he even says that she can eat from their stuff.
Yeah.
So already he's being
Yeah.
kind.
Caring for her.
Yeah, verse 8 says, And Naomi and Boaz said to Ruth, Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. And then later it says, she wonders, why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? And I looked up that word foreigner.
Hmm.
It actually means somebody, Nikar means, is a masculine word that means to not to be a foreigner, somebody from another country. This
Yeah.
is the feminine form of that. So it's kind of
Hmm.
neat. So that means she's going in the ancient years. She would have two strikes against her. She's a female, so she wouldn't be able to, sell her labor to somebody because she
Hmm.
probably wouldn't. They probably would take a male because they would work harder. On the other hand, but the other thing that she's a foreigner, so she's got two strikes against her, and Boaz is willing to be kind to her. So I think
Right.
it's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Boaz replied, All that you've done for your mother in law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord and the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge.
Hmm.
That's kind of a neat verse too, because Boaz is actually going to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
So, so not only does he say, "May the Lord reward your work," but he's going to be one of them that actually helps make sure God does reward her.
Yeah.
So he puts his mouth or his money where his mouth is, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah. All right. Uh, Naomi. Now the next part, Ruth comes back and tells Naomi, and Naomi is very happy about that. Naomi knows about Boaz, and we'd already learned earlier that she knows he's related, right?
Yeah.
And and she is pleased by his response, that his kindness to her. She gleaned in his field during barley and wheat harvest. Look at verse 20. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withheld his kindness to the living and to the dead." Now that's kind of neat, right? Because what he means is that by providing for Naomi and Ruth, he's actually being kind to
Oh,
their husbands,
yeah.
even.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Then again, Naomi said to her, "This man is our relative. He is one of our closest relatives." So she actually knew that, but she also must know that he's not the closest one. Because notice she
Yeah.
makes it clear he's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then verse 22 says, "And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field.'" So
Hmm.
that makes it clear also that time of Judges was probably pretty dangerous
Right.
for other people, especially if you were somebody who is weak and could be
Yeah.
easily taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much chapter 2. Let's see. Now we go to chapter 3, and Naomi has a plan, I put.
Yeah.
Naomi knew that Boaz was a close relative, and hopefully he would perform a brother-in-law or a brother's duty. He's actually a brother, or not
Like
a
a cousin or
brother-in-law.
something.
I mean, he's not that close, but he's at
Yeah.
least one of the close ones. Boaz seems to be honored and willing to take care of the situation. Almost certainly, the phrase "spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative" is asking him if he will marry Ruth.
Hmm.
Let me make sure you see it. In chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, it says, "And it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was laying at his feet. And he said, 'Who are you?' And she answered, 'I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maids, for you are a close relative.'" So she's probably offering to wanting him to marry her, to take care of
Yeah.
her. That covering over your maid means to protect you. I'm sure is what that
Yeah.
image
Right. Right.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's again kind of a neat thing. And Naomi's kind of funny because she makes sure now, after he's eaten and he's feeling really good, then go lay at his feet. So she wants to make sure everything's as good as possible before he
Yeah.
sends her
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
it. Oh, all right. So Naomi's plan worked in verses 14 through 18. Boaz knows that he's not the closest relative. So he says he actually gave her 6 measures. And I assume that it doesn't say in the biblical text what that measure was, but
Hmm.
I'm assuming it was probably an ephah. And
Okay.
an ephah is almost a bushel of grain. So he
Okay.
gives her 6 bushels, I'm assuming, and puts it in her, her cloak kind of thing. So that's actually a lot of grain for them. Uh, I read one thing um, about a pint, about 2 pints of grain would be what they ate each day. So to
Hmm.
have, these 6 bushels, that would have kept them fed for quite a while.
Yeah.
So it does sound like it's a very generous kind of display here.
And
All
how
right,
was
now,
this functioning kind of in the story? Because he's still unsure if he can marry her, right?
yes,
So he's still
but
going to take care of her on some level, even if he can't
yeah.
marry her. Is that kind of?
Well, I'm assuming this is like a down payment, saying that yes, I'm going to keep my deal. I'm
Yeah.
going to go to this person. So I think what it's doing is it's telling both Ruth and Naomi that he's going to do his part of the bargain if he
I see.
can.
I see.
Yeah. So I think it's like a surety or something like that.
Yeah.
You give them a little down payment so that the rest will be coming if it all works out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, she said these. She comes back to Naomi and she says, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, 'Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" So I think that's a hint saying, if he would have sent her away with nothing, that's
Mm.
probably not a very good sign that he's willing to do it.
Yeah.
But if he sends her back with stuff, then that's telling Naomi, oh yeah, this guy's really going to do
He's
what he
serious.
says.
Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 18 says, then she said, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today. So that convinces Naomi that he's going to do it.
Yeah.
At least to the best of his ability. We're going to find out that apparently this other guy could have gone ahead and taken the land anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go to that, because that's actually really interesting too.
Okay.
Oh, I wanted you to see this. This is a picture of probably about the size of an ephah.
Mm.
An ephah is one homer worth in Exodus 16:26, and an omer's worth of manna was enough to feed someone for a day, according to when they were wandering in the
Mm.
wilderness. An ephah's worth of barley would therefore have been equivalent to about 10 days worth of food.
Yeah.
So, and because there's two of them, so
Yeah.
that's a lot of food.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I think she can be pretty convinced that he's going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now they get together. All right. Boaz redeems Ruth in chapter 4. The other near relative could jeopardize, he says he could jeopardize his inheritance if he married Ruth, and thus he allows Boaz to marry her. See, the way Boaz says it, he makes it sound like he's initially just going to get the land, and the guy's all, the near relatives, oh yeah, I'll do that. But then Boaz says this in verse 5. Then Boaz says, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. The
Mm-hmm.
closest relative says, I cannot redeem it for myself because I could jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself that you may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it.
Hmm.
Now, here's my best guess of what that means. I've got a little picture here. So they both got land, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
both, the near relatives has a family, and in births, Ruth's going to have offspring. So the guy initially thinks that he's going to get all the land. So that's a great deal for him, right?
Yeah.
But my guess is he's got children, so that land would have been divided up between his
Mm.
children. Now, what if Ruth is really productive and she has even more children than the near relative does?
Yeah.
That could mean that his own children could get even less,
Get
because
less
they'd all be
percentage.
divided by more people. So
Right.
I think that's what it's getting at. It means, because he said, well, here's what he says. The last part. Okay, so the nearest relative says, I cannot redeem it for myself because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. And I think that's a
Mm.
pretty good translation. So
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to explain what I think that means by those pictures there.
Yeah.
So if Ruth has more offspring than this near relative does, then that means the land will be divided up by even more people, and it wouldn't be a good deal for him.
Yeah. Because when he says I would jeopardize my own inheritance, that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean something he's standing to inherit. It's what he
No,
will give down.
that's what I think it is,
Yeah.
because he's
I see
talking
that.
about inheritance. That
Yeah.
means what he's given to his children, I think.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I think that's what it means, and it would make sense in the context then.
Yeah.
All right. All right. They switch sandals to confirm their agreement, and
Mm-hmm.
Boaz seems to be willing to raise up children for the deceased people.
Mm-hmm.
My guess, and remember, he doesn't have any children yet because he's not married.
Yeah.
So in verse 9 through 11, it says, and Boaz said to the elders of the people, you are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Malchion, to be my wife, in order to raise up a name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. So, see, it makes it real clear that the reason for this kinsman redeemer was to make sure that no families died out from
Yeah.
the Israelite people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then verse 11, all the people who were in the court and the elders said, we are witnesses. Now, then they give her a blessing. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the houses of Israel. Remember, altogether they have 12 children. So
Yeah.
that's quite a few.
Yeah.
and may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem.
Hmm.
So that's kind of, so it's not only that they are witnesses now, but they even give a
A
blessing
blessing.
to
Yeah.
the people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, it is.
All right, then they get married and they have a child, and the child will carry on Naomi's line and protect her in old age. Verse 13 says, so Naomi took Ruth and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today. May his name become famous in Israel. Now, that's actually quite a statement when you think about it. So remember, she thought God had basically abandoned her and
Yeah.
cursed her. This is showing that that's not true.
Right.
And so the people are making it real clear, you've got a redeemer. God still loves you and is protecting you.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Okay, then the last 4 verses basically, or 5 verses, are David's genealogy. The
Hmm.
neighbors announce the birth of the child, and he's in David's line, and it gives the line there. Verse 17 says, the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now,
Mm.
if the neighbors really did name the son, that would be very unusual. Usually it's the father or
Yeah.
sometimes the mother, but usually the father.
Yeah.
And so to have the neighbors name him. So I think all that means is that they're announcing the name. So they
Mm.
karad can often mean it does mean to name a person, but I think it can also mean to announce the name. And that
Yeah.
sounds like what they're doing. They're actually letting them know that God has provided for Naomi, and so I think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
The name Obed means servant or one who's
Mm.
serving.
Mm.
So I'm not sure why he got that name because but he does help these people become um, he provides for them basically. So maybe
Yeah.
that's more of the idea of provider too.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. All right. So that's the end of the story. I wanted you to see. Here's the family line. So here you've got Eli Melech and Naomi at the
Hmm.
very top. Um, uh, Eli Melech dies. Then you have Ophrah and Ruth, and Kilhan and Mahlon die. So
Hmm.
now you got Ruth and Boaz, and they have Obed and Jesse and David.
Yeah.
Once you get to David, to Jesse, that's a real famous one. So you know
Sure. Yeah.
is coming.
Yeah.
On this side, I've actually got notice you've got Haran, Lot, and Moab. Those are
Mm.
on that side, and
Yeah.
they then line of David goes down to Jesus. So I thought
Yeah.
this is kind of a helpful picture. Both of those kind of help us to see
Yeah.
what's all going on.
Right.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
I thought those were helpful illustrations.
Yeah.
All right, here's some cultural elements in the book. First, that famine in the time of the judges. Now,
Yeah.
that actually makes sense because remember, Deuteronomy told them that if they disobeyed God, that God would send
Sure.
punishments, and
Yeah.
famine was one of them.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. And then there's a woman without a husband or sons. She's in grave danger, and we often don't appreciate it, but there's nobody then to take care of her, and
Yeah.
and so she's in real danger.
Well, and we've talked in previous episodes about how, law in Israel was kind of set up to try to protect
Yeah.
against that because it was such a risky situation.
Yeah. And that's probably why the kinsman redeemer was even
Right.
initiated, right?
Yeah.
So it had helped that idea too. Yeah.
Hmm.
Naomi goes back to the family for protection,
Yep.
and especially with that idea of gleaning, and that's
Hmm.
kind of the next one. My
Yep.
guess is that not every country, well, we know not every country did gleaning, but I even wonder if during the time of the judges, if even Israel did it very often.
Yeah.
So they happen to come upon Boaz, who is willing to do
Yeah.
gleaning, and not only that, willing to help
Even
Naomi and
past that.
Ruth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got the protection of a near relative, and that's that kinsman redeemer kind of idea.
Yeah.
and then the kinsman redeemer idea. So,
Yeah.
so all of those are kind of crucial elements. Oh, I didn't put on here the idea of switching the
The
sandals.
sandals. I was about to ask you
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
You
what
know,
is that? What's the symbolism with that?
yeah. Well, think about it. If every day when you put on your sandals and you're looking down and you see that you have two different sandals, it's going
Hmm.
to remind you of the agreement that you made. So I think it's to just continue to remind them that this was an agreement that we made, and I need to honor it and remember it.
Yeah. Hmm.
So if you think about it, it's a brilliant way to remember, because every day you put on your sandals,
That's right.
every
Yeah.
day
Yeah.
you're reminded again of that promise you made.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a neat
Yeah,
way of
that's a good
doing it.
image. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So here's some questions. How many ways is hesed expressed in the book?
Several ways. You listed at the front 3 different ways,
Okay.
through kind of, Ruth and Naomi, right?
Okay.
Because Ruth's commitment to stay with Naomi. You've got
Right.
Boaz, is his expression. I guess it's his expression towards Naomi and Ruth, probably, right?
Yeah. Good.
And then
Good.
God's expression through their marriage.
Okay. Is there any more? I
I'm
just did
sure
three,
there.
but I think there's a lot more.
Oh, okay. What else
Can
is
you
in there?
think? Well, think about it. Who
Hmm.
else? Where? And I think Ruth to Boaz. Remember, he's
Oh,
kind of
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
shocked that a young woman would go after
Yeah.
him. So I
Yeah.
think you've got that. I
Yeah.
think God to all of them. Right? Here's Boaz,
Mm.
an older person, even though he's rich,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. Yeah.
still he's not who's he going to pass his inheritance
Yeah.
on to if he doesn't have a child.
Yeah.
So God's being gracious there. Then you've got God gracious to both Boaz, Ruth, Naomi, in that they have a child that's going to be in the line of David.
Yeah. I was about
that's
to say,
that's
yeah.
kind of an honor.
Well,
Yeah.
it may even be more than just to them, really. I mean,
Yeah.
could you say it's to like the whole state of Israel? You know?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, there's all kinds of ways that Hesed is displayed in
Yeah.
this book, which is kind of neat because it's the time of the judges
Yeah.
when you don't expect to see Hesed anywhere.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Why is Ruth from Moab important?
Well, for one thing, she's an outsider, so you wouldn't
Okay.
expect her to be a recipient of hesed, or
Good.
really any kind of love. So that's an
Y-
important part. But I think it's interesting
Yeah.
too that you showed in the line, that it's also a kind of reunion in a way.
Okay.
That's kind of
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that they go to Moab when
Yeah.
you would think that's no better than going to another part of Israel, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then also, I think it's interesting that Naomi is left in Moab with no one,
Yeah.
with all the family dying. So that's actually pretty important.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I mean, she could have been in any country, but
Mm.
when all her family dies, that's either one. It would have put her as a foreigner in a foreign country, which
Yeah.
is always a scary
Yeah.
predicament, especially back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is Levirate marriage initiated?
Hmm.
Why did
Now,
why did God
Leviterate
start
is a
that?
word we haven't used yet, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's the same as that kinsman redeemer kind of
Okay,
thing.
that's kinda what I was
Yeah.
thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that helps, well, one of the things we talked about was that ensures that the, lines of Israel, the family lines of Israel continue.
Yeah.
But it
And
also seems
remember,
like it protects. Oh, go ahead.
no, go on. That was good.
Yeah, yeah, that it protects, particularly vulnerable people like women in situations where families have died.
Yeah. And it's going to make sure that every tribe, this is towards the beginning of when the land was divided,
Mm,
to make sure that the tribes kept their land. And
yeah,
that's actually going to be pretty important too, because if you get a family and then you've got only women, let's say all the males die off, now you've got no way for these women to take care of themselves.
right,
And so I think that, especially in like somebody like Naomi's case, where her husband and her children die. So
right,
that would be a real dire situation. And so
yeah,
I think this kind of Levirate marriage kind of helps that.
yeah.
Any ideas why Ruth becomes associated with the Feast of Pentecost in later Judaism?
I'm not sure. My guess would be that it's her connection as being in the line of David.
Okay.
Would that
Um,
be right?
The only one I know, and that might be good, but I think the main reason is of when they come into the land. Remember,
Mm,
it was the early
the harvest time.
harvest time, the
Yeah,
very beginning, and that's
yeah,
basically when Passover is
yeah,
towards the very beginning of it. So
yeah,
it
yeah.
actually links the two, probably because of the date, even.
Hmm. Well, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Okay, what's the purpose of the book? So if we had to figure out what's God put this in the Bible for,
Yeah.
what's the purpose of this book?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think its placement is probably pretty important here, right? We've
Okay.
come through the Torah and Joshua and Judges, and now we're seeing kind of a narrative within the time of Judges. So, what's the
Yeah.
purpose of the book? I can think of a few things. One, uh, for sure, we're seeing the line of David, which that's
Okay.
going to be a really important part to not just
Yeah.
the whole narrative of the Old Testament, but the broader narrative of the whole Bible.
Good.
Uh, I think too, though, it's interesting thing we see a bunch that God cares for people outside of Israel as well.
Yeah. Good.
That's kind of an interesting thing, and that like um, there's something about being a righteous person that matters maybe more than being in the right line.
Okay.
What do you think about
Good.
that?
No, I like that. I think that idea is here's God's love for all nations, and it's perfectly displayed at a time when His own people are about as wicked as well,
Mm,
I don't know if they can get wickeder, but it's in a very bad time for Israel, and
yeah,
God's showing. You know what? If remember that passage where it says, if you guys didn't cry out, or Jesus says, if you guys didn't cry out, the rocks would cry out. It
right.
almost makes it sound like this is kind of an image of that. If
Yeah,
Israel won't obey me, I'll find others that
someone
will.
will. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think that becomes really important. So here it's put in, I think, in the Bible to show that God has a love for other people, and that He can find godly people even when His own people are really wicked.
Yeah,
And so I think that's a crucial message for the whole story of the Bible.
yeah, for sure.
So, all right. So now we got some summary things.
Okay. Yeah,
So the time of the judges was a very evil time.
yeah.
Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, is kind of that key.
Mhm.
And God found an amazing woman during that evil time. She is, in my mind, she is just amazing. Both her and Naomi
Yeah, it's kinda
display
2.
faith.
Yeah,
Yeah, that just amaze me.
yeah,
So, and then God spares not only Naomi, but Ruth also.
yeah.
So who knows what would have happened to Ruth if she'd have stayed in
Mm,
Moab. I mean, we don't
yeah,
know, but he
yeah,
certainly takes great care of her when she comes to God's
yeah,
people.
right.
And then gleaning helps spare a poor woman's life and her daughter-in-law. And
Yeah,
so it shows you how important gleaning really is.
yeah.
Yeah. And Boaz helped Ruth feel the loving kindness of Israel's God. I like that.
Mm,
When he
yeah,
makes that he blesses her, and he's going to
yeah,
be a part of that blessing.
yeah, right, right.
And then Ruth is incorporated in the line of David and also in Jesus's line.
Yeah,
And I think all of that really makes this book kind of amazing.
yeah,
So there are some difficult Hebrew parts in it, but by and large, the book is just an amazing
mm,
reflection of God's love and His hesed to all of these people.
yeah, yeah. It's a
Well,
really good one.
that's the book.
Okay, that sounds good. What do you got for us next week?
Well, we're going to start into Samuel, and
Nice.
yeah, so we'll get to see how the basically the monarchy, how it gets started. It's not
Yeah,
going to start off as a monarchy; it's going to start
right.
off gradually. And so we've already had the time of the judges, where these judges are going through the land and ruling in different parts of it. Probably
Yeah,
at some point, that's not enough for the people of Israel. They want a king that can
yeah,
that can guide them and lead them into battle. And
right.
they're going to see it.
Yeah,
And even at that point, wouldn't you rather have God leading you into
yeah,
battle?
yeah.
Yeah. So what a lousy choice in
I
their
know.
minds.
It's a painful lesson they're gonna learn.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I'll see you next week then, and
Okay,
we'll get started in the next one.
that sounds good to me.
All right. Thank you.